That man was Thomas Button, a Welshman who had a life filled with adventures. He fought bravely in several conflicts, so much so in one of them that he was awarded a pension for life while still in his 20s.
He fought the Spanish, the Barbary pirates of North Africa, and various others. He even sailed on a raiding ship in the Caribbean. Notably, he became a key figure in one of the great mysteries of his time. And through his exploration of North America, he left his mark on maps we see today. For a while, one of the largest natural features on Earth was named after him. He had a remarkable career, but in the end, an epic legal struggle with the naval establishment brought him down. Thomas Button was born about 1575 into a landowning family at Worlerton, just outside Cardiff. The site of the family home, which no longer exists, is better known today as Dyffryn House and Gardens. It seems he embarked on a navy career as a teenager. There are indications in his letters, written later in life, that he was active shortly after the time of the Spanish Armada in 1588. It's known that when the Spanish invaded Kinsale in Ireland in 1601, he captained a small warship called Moon. He was commended for gallantry and was awarded a lifetime pension of 6 shillings and 8 pence a day, which was a lot back then, and he would have been only around 26 at the time. Very soon after, he was off to the Caribbean and commanded the privateer ship Willoughby. A privateer was like a pirate, but with a government license, encouraged to raid and rob enemies, mainly, of course, the Spanish and French. This ship was owned by a fellow Welshman, the very rich Sir Robert Mansell, who became Treasurer of the Royal Navy in 1604.
Thomas was fortunate in several ways. He came from a family that was quite well off, and he married into a wealthy one through his wife Mary, who was the daughter of Sir Walter Rice, the MP for Carmarthenshire. He became the nephew of Sir Robert Mansell, and he could hardly have wished for a more powerful patron.
Thomas was also taken under the wing of Sir John Trevor, a Denbighshire man who became surveyor of the Navy's ships, and also Phineas Pett, a master shipwright for the Royal Navy.
As promotion in the Navy in those days was largely a matter of who you knew, Thomas was obviously very lucky. But he was courageous and was to prove himself a very able navigator.
The king at this time was James I. His son, Henry Frederick, the Prince of Wales, was just a teenager, but he held the grand title of Supreme Protector of the Company of Discoverers of the North-West Passage. Probably through the influence of his supporters, Thomas was given the job of solving the great mystery of the day. What had happened to the explorer Henry Hudson? Hudson had made several voyages to map the east coast of what is now the United States and Canada. In 1610, he had set off in his ship Discovery to search for the fabled North-West Passage. It was believed that the Arctic ice would melt sufficiently in high summer months for ships to access the Pacific and the Far East. If that was possible, it would be a massive breakthrough for trade. Hudson's ship entered a huge bay, but he became icebound for many months. When warmer weather returned, he was all set to continue exploring. But his crew were not. They'd had enough. They wanted to go home, and so mutinied. Hudson, his young son, and 7 others were put in a small boat, set adrift, and disappeared. The Discovery, though, sailed home. The men who returned said that the organisers of the mutiny, 2 men, had since died. Whatever the truth of the story, no action was taken against them. And so it was that Thomas Button found himself in charge of 2 ships, the Resolution and Hudson's former vessel, the Discovery. They set off across the Atlantic to find the missing explorer. At least that was the reason given to the public. The journey was sponsored by the Company of the Merchant Discoverers of the Northwest Passage, better known as the Northwest Company. Thomas's instructions from the company were incredibly specific. He was to record information about tides and at what latitude to be at a certain time, the weather, and to achieve a full and perfect discovery of the Northwest Passage. But his orders contained no mention whatsoever of Hudson. Finding him in such a huge area would have been a near impossible task. The company had its commercial priorities, and they were about finding the Northwest Passage trade route. Hudson seemed to have been mentioned as a PR exercise of the day. One detail that seems remarkable is that two of the men who sailed with Thomas had been on the Discovery with Hudson at the time of the mutiny. They were Robert Bylot and Abacuk Prickett.
But the fact was that the men had volunteered to repeat the arduous voyage, so Thomas may have had no doubts about them. At any event, he would certainly have welcomed the experience that they brought to his voyage.
Thomas sailed into the enormous Hudson Bay. On the way, he named one island after his own ship. They sailed into the bay's west coast. The vessels had been damaged in a great storm, and shelter was sought at the mouth of a large river. They wintered there. The weather was bitter, and some died, including the Discovery ship's master, Robert Nelson. Thomas named the huge river after him. It is called the Nelson River to this day. The Resolution was crushed in pack ice, but in the spring the journey continued on the Discovery. Thomas explored some of the west coast of the bay, which he named New Wales. These men were probably the first Europeans to set foot in what is now the Canadian province of Manitoba. And, to put it in perspective, this happened 8 years before the Pilgrim Fathers famously went ashore in Massachusetts Bay in 1620.
But as for that all-important sea route to the Pacific, it eluded them. Convinced that there was only one way in and out of the bay, they set out for home.
On the way home, Thomas named another island, this time Mansell Island, as a tribute to his relative and patron. Thomas had found neither Hudson nor the Northwest Passage, but at least his extensive notes and maps were to become invaluable to those explorers who followed him. Thomas's next posting was as Admiral of the Irish coasts. His job was to oppose Scottish rebels and to suppress the rampant piracy of that time. He did a good job, and in 1616 was knighted. In 1620, Sir Thomas was in a large naval force sent by King James I to Algiers. It was an attempt to suppress the Barbary pirates of North Africa, who had terrorized the Mediterranean and the Atlantic coasts, including the British Isles, with their slave raids. The fleet was under the control of Sir Robert Mansell, with Sir Thomas as his rear admiral. He once again acquitted himself well, but the mission itself was a failure. The attackers were somehow low on ammunition and were forced to retreat. It's possible that this shortage was because of a big problem in the Stuart Navy: corruption. Money allocated for pay, provisions, and everything else a ship needs often found its way into private pockets.
In 1625, Thomas was appointed to a commission to inquire into the state of the Navy. And this is where things started to go very wrong for him. He complained loudly about rampant corruption, and this annoyed some other people, presumably those with their fingers in the till. A campaign was launched to get him off the commission. It took 2 years, but in the end it succeeded. He left.
Sir Thomas had written, "All the world will take notice that I am unbound of the ship in which I have served so long. If dismissed, I shall shelter myself under the lee of a poor pension."
But his pension had been stopped, and it seems that he was also owed a large sum of money for expenses paid from his own pocket.
He repeatedly complained to the naval authorities. Sir Thomas was a very determined man and would not give in. Arguments turned into lengthy legal cases, and then, perhaps as sometimes happens now, the lawyers were the main winners. It seems that his patrons could not protect him. He was accused of misconduct and other trumped-up charges, but all were dismissed.
Despite his years of exemplary service, Sir Thomas was stripped of the title of admiral. Much of his money had gone. He fell into poor health and died in 1634.
One report says he was buried at the Church of St. Margaret's in Westminster, London. Another says it was at his home in South Wales, so we just don't know. 3 years after his death, the Navy seems to have relented. Perhaps it was guilt at the treatment of a loyal servant. Sir Thomas's widow Mary received a then substantial sum of £650 in settlement of the money her husband was owed. The huge bay that Sir Thomas Button had explored was known for some years as Button Bay, but later being given the name of the enigmatic Hudson.
Sir Thomas never found the Northwest Passage, but he didn't doubt that it existed, and he advised others who sought that fabled route.
He wrote that his belief in the existence of the Northwest Passage was as strong as his knowledge that passages exist between Calais and Dover and Holyhead and Ireland.
Admiral Sir Thomas Button was a noted seaman, navigator and explorer. His name may not be much remembered today, but his was a life with deserved place in Welsh history.